A mysterious castle on a hill, an aged gateway, and a reflected lady in black.
I'm standing here in historic Manitou Springs where I've heard these photos were taken. I don't know much about them right now other than that they're pretty haunting. I'd like to find out more about them because my mind automatically goes to the ghost stories that might be associated with them. What was this building and who are these people? I'm headed off to Pikes Peak Library's Special Collections Department to speak to Katie Rudolph to find out more about them.
So this is the archives. This is where we process a lot of the collections.
This is where the magic happens.
Yes. An archives is like a library. It's a place to go to find information. But rather than just looking at books, in archives, researchers can gather first-hand facts, data, and evidence from things like letters, reports, notes, memos, photos, and audio and video recordings. The job of archivists, the professionals who work with archival materials, is to make sure all these important types of records are available for future generations. Archives preserve not only the content of the records, but also the context in which they were created. For that reason, the records are kept together in the way the organization or person intended them to be used.
So tell me how you came across these photos.
So we received this collection in 2008. The negatives were donated by the family of the late James Hermanson.
And who's James Hermanson?
Mr. Hermanson moved here in the 1950s. He was a police officer. He retired in about 1979. He had donated some copy prints to us in 1970. And those photos were of mining and parades and things like that. And they dated from around 1900, well before Mr. Hermanson's birth.
And what did you do when you got the negatives here?
So when we received them, they were in, for the most part, their original wooden crates. A lot of them were dirty, damaged. Water had seeped to the top of the box. So the first step was really delicately brushing the negatives. And then we got new enclosures for them, so acid-free archival enclosures. We transferred all the identifying information from the original sleeves onto these, and then we started to make an inventory. Over the course of the inventory, it became apparent that we really didn't know what a lot of these images were. So we decided to scan them so we could see the positive image. Once we scanned them, we really could recognize quite a few of the images. A lot were Manitou Springs, the Colorado Springs and Interurban Railway Company, Royal Gorge, Ute Pass. And then some of the negatives did have descriptions on the negative as well as the photographer's name. But then there were these more puzzling images. There was one of the White House in Washington, D.C., a paddle boat on a river, posed portraits of women standing on the banks of a creek, and, of course, the imposing stone house. And the house photos really were among the most eerie. One shows a man locking up an iron fence with the house situated behind him. Another, there's a man sitting on the front porch. So it really made me, wonder, where is this house and whoever took these pictures. So Deborah Harrison of the Manitou Springs Heritage Center just happened to be looking at this collection. She was looking for Navajo geyser images, but she came across the house photos, and instantly she knew this was Redstone Castle.
Oh, okay.
So now that I had the name of the house, I had to do some quick searches, and I was really surprised by what I found.
After talking to Katie, I decided to do some searching on my own. According to this page, the castle was built in 1890 by a man named William A. Davis, who planned a housing development for which the castle was a model. The model never sold, though. Davis lived in the castle briefly, but it stood vacant for long periods of time. That's when the stories of it being haunted began. Now here's the part that really got my attention. According to this story, in 1908, the castle was leased to an Alice Crawford Snow, who happened to be the younger sister of Manitou's now famous Emma Crawford. Emma's legacy has lived on through the yearly Emma Crawford coffin races, making her something of a local celebrity. According to this site, Emma's sister Alice attempted suicide in the castle. A friend found her covered in blood in a flaming bed. Though she survived, she was never seen again. Many sites also say that Alice moved into the castle to conduct seances and contact spirits who dwelled near the mountain. Perhaps her sister Emma, who is rumored to haunt the area, was one of those spirits. Some of it seems a bit too dramatic to be true, but then I love a good ghost story and I still want to get to the bottom of where those creepy photos came from. So I've been doing some Google searching on the castle, and I'm kind of curious about the dates of some of these photos. I was wondering, you said that they came on glass negatives. I was curious about the glass negatives themselves and if they offer any clues as to dating of photos.
Yeah. So glass was used as a base for negatives before film was available. And these happen to be dry plate glass negatives. They have a gelatin emulsion. They were sold in standard sizes. They were manufactured. And these were really in use in the United States from the 1880s into the 1920s before film replaced plates.
Are there any other clues from these negatives in the collection?
Yeah, the collection really is a mishmash of images, but they seem to date from the 1880s all the way through the 19-teens. But we can look at the content of the images for clues. A lot of the images are of tourist attractions in the Pikes Peak region. And the composition of the images really suggests that it was a professional taking a lot of these photographs. There are a lot of images of the Soda Springs Pavilion in Manitou Springs. That could be a clue. I really believe that the photographer might have been a professional photographer working in Manitou Springs.
When I was doing more searching on the castle, I came across the name William Davis. Some of the websites said that they thought he might have been the one who actually built the castle. Is it possible that he could have been the photographer?
Indeed, the photos could have been Davis's. I was curious about his connection to the photos as well, and I began my search actually in the 1900 city directories.
PPLD Special Collections houses city directories for Colorado Springs, published from 1879 to the present. The directories were published roughly every other year until 1900, when they began to be published annually. The Colorado Springs city directories also include listings for surrounding communities, such as Old Colorado City and Manitou. They list residents alphabetically by surname and usually indicate a person's address, occupation, and spouse's name. Directories may also contain business listings and advertisements, a brief community description, information about local, state, and national government, listings of schools and colleges, clubs, organizations, secret societies, and churches. The Colorado Springs city directories from 1879 through 1922 have been digitized with the gracious help of dedicated volunteers from the Pikes Peak Genealogical Society and are provided on the PPLD website in PDF format. City directories published after 1922 may still be covered by U.S. copyright and are not included here. Originals still in good condition, however, may be viewed in the Special Collections Department of the Pikes Peak Library District.
Here in the 1900 city directory, we find a W.A. Davis, and it says he works in real estate and loans and lives on Nevada Avenue.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense with what we learned from some of the websites. They said that William A. Davis built Redstone Castle to showcase the area where he was trying to sell land.
Right. But look, if we go further into the directory, we find a section that's just for Manitou residents, and we find another William A. Davis. And this William A. Davis, he's the proprietor of the Soda Springs Pavilion and Jewelry Store.
Oh, okay, so that would be the pavilion and jewelry store we saw in the glass plate negatives.
Right.
Okay, so maybe that's our connection. William A. Davis built Redstone Castle and owned the pavilion and jewelry store. He's got to have taken those photos.
Maybe. But look, also his residence is on Spencer Avenue in Manitou.
Yeah, but that's not where Redstone Castle is located. Did he maybe live in the castle before 1900?
Possibly. I looked in some of the 1880s and 1890s city directories, and it's not documented, and they don't even make mention of the castle.
Oh, so the city directories aren't really confirming that Redstone Castle was built by William A. Davis.
Right, but there are a few other things that we can check, and I'm going to have you talk to Jody Jones, who's our house research expert.
Okay, great. I've been going over these mysterious photographs that I found with Katie, and we've tracked them down, and they're a house in Manitou, and we found out it's called Redstone Castle.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah, and Katie told me that you could talk to me some more about doing some research on this house.
Sure. Any house, whether it's big or small, is unique in its own special way. And folks are really curious about when their house was built, who built it, maybe why it was built the way it was. But just as important as determining the date that the house was built is discovering the people who lived in the house, the families that made the house a home. That's what really rounds out a house history.
Yeah, that's great. So how do I get started finding more about this house?
Well, you could start by looking at the El Paso County Assessor's website, its property search. That would give you a pretty good idea of when the house was built, when the castle was built. And then also, you said it was in Manitou, so I would try some Manitou histories, maybe some walking tours to see if anybody else has researched the house. You don't want to have to duplicate. And then ordinarily, you just start with the city directories and you look up names or you look up street addresses and trace it back as far as you can go.
Oh, okay. You know, I've already looked in the city directory, and Redstone Castle isn't even mentioned. And William A. Davis was actually listed as living on Spencer Avenue in Manitou. So.
Yeah, Manitou's kind of tricky. The city directories are Colorado Springs, and the street listings are for Colorado Springs, and there aren't any street listings for Manitou, even though there's some early directories by name, which you discovered. You might take a look at the census records for W.A. Davis, see if you can find him there. Maybe our newspaper indexes might be able to help you out. You might just have to sit down at the microfilm reader and go through the newspaper around the time you think the castle was built, and see if there's a story about it. It's a castle. Surely you'll find a newspaper story about it.
I started with the El Paso County Assessor's website and found the castle listed. It says it was built in 1872, which doesn't match up with what I read. I went to the census records next. Even though I found a William Davis in Manitou in 1900, 1910, and 1920, he's listed as living on Spencer Avenue, just like the city directory said. I looked in the newspaper records and found this tax listing from the Colorado Springs Weekly Gazette dated December 5th, 1901. This was great, but I still didn't know much about the building of the castle or the Davis brothers. So I spent several hours a day looking through articles from around the time I thought the castle was built, until I found a bunch of information. The story of the castle began in 1889 with an article in the Manitou Springs Journal.
Mr. W.A. Davis and brother, Mr. R.M. Davis, have purchased a 40-acre tract of Mayor Davis for $7,000. This land lies just south of the city and is only 1/4 mile from the mansions. It is their intention to plat it, and lots will be placed upon the market in a short time.
By June 25, 1892, it was announced in the Manitou Springs Journal that the new $10,000 home of Mr. W.A. Davis, built in the new addition Manitou Terrace and on the highest elevation in town, was complete.
There is no prettier view in Manitou than is to be had from the cozy veranda encircling the Davis residence. Ute Pass and Williams Canyon are seen in all their beauty. Manitou's homes, hotels, and lawns spread out in the valley like a picture. The Garden of the Gods, with its peculiar formations, showed grandly in the bright sunlight, and the plains with its cloud-shaped surface stretched off to the east until it blended with the horizon in an indistinguishable union. It was a great panorama. But the residence! It is built of Manitou redstone from basement to roof in a graceful design, with a tower on the northeast end. From the bedchamber over the sitting room, a door opens onto a cute balcony, of the Romeo and Juliet sort, with a spiral roof, just the place to hang a hammock and read a novel.
I'm standing in front of Redstone Castle as it looks today. When it was first built, it was pretty isolated, and it still looks pretty isolated today, although there's a neighborhood that's been built around it. I wonder why the Davis brothers decided to build a house like that and why no one bought it. I would also like to find out if Emma Crawford's family really did live there and if the castle is haunted. I'm going to go back to talk to Jody some more to find out if she has any other ideas for me to find out more about the history of Redstone Castle. Thanks for directing me to the articles. I found out some really great information.
Good.
Yeah, I did learn that William A. Davis was the builder of the castle.
Okay.
So one of the things I'd like to do is find out a little bit more about the mysterious ghost stories that surround the castle. So I would like to learn more about some of the other people who lived there and died there.
Well, we do have a clipping file on Redstone Castle. And some of the information in that may give you stories about the goings-on at Redstone Castle. That would be a good starting place for you anyway.
Okay.
A clipping file is a large collection of articles of local interest which have been gathered from a variety of sources, including newspapers, pamphlets, and magazine articles. The clippings are organized alphabetically by subject. Many libraries hold clipping files compiled over the years by librarians to provide quick answers to reference questions.
I've had a great time looking at these articles about Redstone Castle. I found some really crazy stories. From this Free Press article from 1956, it talks about how there was a Cripple Creek miner who buried his gold bricks under the floorboards in the basement. It also says that the Redstone Castle was once a hideout for Jesse James and could also have been the inspiration for some of Helen Hunt Jackson's poetry. This article talks about Emma Crawford, who the Manitou Springs coffin races is named for. It is said that she rented the house so that she could look at Red Mountain, her favorite location. After her death, it's said that Alice Crawford, her sister, moved into the house. Alice held many seances there, and now the house is said to be haunted by both the ghosts of Alice and her sister Emma. Hey Katie, look at these articles I found. It's really great about Redstone Castle. This one actually claims that there are gold bricks buried in the basement and that Helen Hunt Jackson actually got some of her inspiration for her poetry from the castle.
Wow, that's really interesting. One thing to remember with newspaper articles, check the dates.
Okay.
These have a lot of information about the early days of the castle, but they date from the 1950s and 60s. They're not exactly primary sources. Primary sources are records created at the time historical events occurred or well after, in the form of memoirs and oral histories. They reflect the individual viewpoint of a participant or observer of a historical event. Primary sources can be letters, manuscripts, diaries and journals, newspaper articles created close to the actual event, speeches, interviews, memoirs, documents produced by government agencies, photographs, audio recordings, moving pictures or video recordings, research data, and even objects or artifacts such as works of art or ancient roads, buildings, tools, and weapons.
What we need to do then is to find primary sources to verify these stories.
Right.
Okay. The story I like the best, that I find most interesting, is about the Crawford sisters. Can we find out more about them?
Yeah, let's look for newspaper articles from the 1890s and early 1900s that'll prove what the other articles and websites say, that the Crawford sisters were here during that time period.
Oh, okay, great.
Katie and I are starting our search in Pikes Peak Newsfinder, the Library District's local newspaper index. It contains citations and full-text articles from the Colorado Springs Gazette and other local newspapers, as well as citations from the Colorado Springs Death Registry.
So we're going to start by doing a search on Emma Crawford. And we're going to sort the articles by the oldest date first, because we want to look for those primary source articles.
Look, there's an obituary for Emma.
Oh, nice. So we can look that one up on microfilm because it's not in full text format yet.
What does that mean?
If you were researching from home, you could click on this button and order the article to be scanned from the microfilm and sent to you by email. It takes a few days. But since you're here, you might as well look it up on microfilm.
Okay. There's quite a few articles here.
Yeah.
Oh, and some of these are already full text.
Oh, yeah, we can bring that one up.
Oh, wow, look at that. That one's from 1984 and talks about people in Manitou feeling the presence of Emma Crawford. It'd be kind of fun to go into Manitou and see what residents think now.
Definitely.
So tell me, what do you know about Emma Crawford?
Emma Crawford, I probably don't know the real story, but from what I understand, she's a legend around here.
She was buried with her wedding dress.
She was married to apparently a wealthy person here.
It's kind of romantic. I think she had a gentleman friend that she was engaged to and never got married.
She was buried in some place up here in the mountains.
She came flying down the mountain a couple of times in the late 1800s after she'd been buried up there on Red Mountain, which was one of her favorite places to go hiking while she was living here recovering from tuberculosis.
The legend is that after some sort of a storm, she rolled down the hill into downtown Manitou.
I think there was a mudslide or something, and her coffin came just sliding down to the center of Manitou.
She is a legend now in town.
We proudly participated in the last coffin race, and one of my friends was Emma Crawford.
I know there's a coffin race every year, and that I know the Miramont Council does a seance.
I think this town has this character, and we love it because they have these legends and stories, and I think it's really interesting.
So let's check out some of those microfilm reels I was talking about.
Okay.
This first one is from December 12th, 1891. It appeared in the Colorado City Iris. Go ahead and read that.
Okay. Miss Emma L. Crawford, who died at Manitou early in the week, was a daughter of Mrs. Jeanette Crawford, the lady who's been giving lectures on spiritualism in the city this past summer. So we do have Emma's obituary, so we know that she was alive at some point.
Right.
And it's also interesting that her mother was practicing spiritualism in the summer, even before Emma died.
Yeah, that is interesting. So let's check out some more of the articles to really understand what happened to Emma.
Sounds good. According to an article in the Manitou Springs Journal from December 12, 1891, Emma Crawford was born on March 24, 1863 in South Royalston, Massachusetts, and died on December 4, 1891 in Manitou Springs, Colorado. The article reads,
Miss Emma L. Crawford, daughter of Mrs. J.W. Crawford, passed to the higher life yesterday evening at 10:30. Funeral private. The few who knew her here remarked her calm, unruffled mood, and though her life was such that intimates were few, she was known by nearly all as a musician of rare power and skill. But few in this vale of Manitou have not at some time heard the reverberations of her wonderful music, and few are there who have not paused and listened with a vague feeling that some unearthly power inspired the keys.
The article from the December 12, 1891 Manitou Springs Journal continues to describe her funeral services, which took place at the family residence on Ute Avenue. The service was described as unusual, but very impressive.
Among those present was Mr. William Hildebrand of New York, an intimate friend of the departed. To this gentleman, Miss Crawford had confided a wish to be buried near the crest of Red Chief Mountain, which overlooks Manitou from the south. To that lone and windswept eyrie her remains were borne on the following day, and there may she rest in peace.
The article goes on to give a friend's account of Emma.
At a very early age, she showed a decided talent for music, which was nourished and developed by her mother, who herself is an accomplished pianist and music teacher. When only 3 years old, she liked no plaything better than to sit on the piano cover and to listen to her mother practicing Beethoven's sonatas. At the tender age of 12, she commenced to give piano lessons and public recitals, and with 15 years, she was able to render the music of the great masters with rare perfection. With the hope of gaining in our mountains health and strength for her future music work, Miss Crawford has spent several seasons at Manitou, where she made many friends through her charming character, genteel manners, and cheerful disposition. Next to music, she loved nothing more than nature, and she was deeply impressed with the grandeur of the mountains around Manitou, on which her slender figure, clad in a red dress, could be seen on every warm day. Her favorite spot was Red Mountain, which she named Red Chief in honor of the Red Aborigines, whose ardent friend and advocate she had been. The last time she climbed to the summit of this mountain, accompanied by a friend, she was deeply impressed and moved more than usually, and requested the latter to bury her on the very spot they were standing, in case she should leave this life before him. She had a horror of cemeteries, formalities, and anything low or gloomy, and even death, and wished to be carried high to sunshine and pure air. The promise was given with little expectation that its fulfillment would so soon be called upon. Miss Crawford's death came unexpected, having been confined to her room only a week. Her friend arrived from the east just in time to fulfill his sad and sacred duty.
In an article from the September 28, 1947 issue of the Gazette, longtime Manitou resident William Bill Crosby says that Madam Crawford and her daughter Emma came to Manitou in 1889 to help with Emma's tuberculosis. He claims that they rented a house on Capitol Hill, a two-story framed house with a gable roof and bay windows. This house has been identified as 104 Capitol Hill Avenue, but there are no records of Madam Crawford or Emma living in this house. The Crosbys go on to tell the tale of Emma and a man named William Hildebrand, the friend of Emma who promised to bury her on top of Red Mountain. Hildebrand was an engineer for the Pikes Peak Cog Railway, and the Crosbys claim that the two were engaged and would marry as soon as Emma recovered from her illness. In an oral history recorded with Crosby on October 16, 1967, he says,
"She cooked up this story, and if she'd get on top of Red Mountain, she could commune with an Indian brave spirit. And she kept that up, and so one day she disappeared from her out there, and late in the evening said she'd been on top of Red Mountain. And we wouldn't believe it, but she tied her handkerchief on a limb of a tree looking right down into Manitou. And the next day went up there and found it and had her initial on it. And she was so tired that night that she said, when I die, I want to be buried beneath that tree on Red Mountain. Now then, the fellow that was going to marry her was Hildebrand, and he was a consulting engineer on the Cog Road. They were building the Cog Road then. Well, Em improved for a little while, and then she had a back set and she died. Well, he carried out her wish. He went to work to get the ground up there to bury Emma. Well, he couldn't get a deed to it, so went ahead and buried her anyhow.
According to Crosby, in the September 28, 1947 Gazette article,
"The tangled scrub oak, knotty pinions, and heavy pine made the climb up the mountain a rough one. There were 12 pallbearers to work in 2 shifts going up the mountain. They went up the canyon that separates Red Mountain from Eagle Mountain, and then, because the face of Red Mountain is too steep and rugged a climb, they came up the back. They started out in the morning, and it took them most of the day to make the climb. They buried Emma on the mountain top, beneath an ugly windswept tree, and they covered the grave with rocks."
The writer of this article reports that Crosby was a young man at the time and went along on the climb because he was in awe of the procession and the strangeness of the grave on top of a mountain. In addition to Hildebrand, Crosby recalls the names of a few of the other pallbearers: H. Gosling, J.G. Highstand, David Jones, Howard Jones, and Peter Missler among them.
Then they built the Red Mountain incline there, and they had to remove her grave. Well, they moved it over to the side of the mountain in loose gravel, and there wasn't much to move.
Although Crosby recalled this event as happening in 1924, newspapers reported the construction of Red Mountain Incline occurring in 1912. But Emma's story doesn't end here.
Body is that of Marion Crawford. Gruesome find atop Red Mountain recalls death of a girl in 1890. Old-time residents of Manitou are convinced that the boys who brought a skull down from atop Red Mountain and were questioned by the police Sunday about a grave they said they had found had run across the grave of Miss Marion Crawford, who was buried on the mountain in 1890. Marshal David S. Banks of Manitou yesterday found scattered about back of the Colorado house on Waltham Avenue some more human bones and the handles of a coffin. They appeared to have been wrapped into a bundle and left there, and had gotten scattered about. It is believed that these are also from the grave.
There are several discrepancies in this article, however. According to city directories from both 1929 and 1930, the Colorado House, a boarding house, was not located on Waltham Avenue, but at 397 Manitou Avenue, making it unclear where the bones are found. They also mistakenly identify Emma as Marion. The next day, on August 7th, a headline in the Gazette claimed that the bones had been identified as part of the skeleton of Emma Crawford. On the issue of the reburial of Emma on Red Mountain, the El Paso County coroner, Dr. G.B. Gilmore, claimed that he had no jurisdiction in the matter, as Red Mountain was outside of an incorporated town and persons could bury their dead where they wished. The August 16, 1929 Gazette reported that a new grave for Emma Crawford would be dug in a Manitou cemetery. Bill Crosby recalls the burial in his 1967 oral history.
Well, they lay in our city hall in the keep for 2 years. We never could get in touch with the mother or any relatives. Dave and I took the bones and the whole thing. We got a plot of ground out in the Manitou Cemetery, kind of a zigzag, that wasn't plotted, wouldn't make a real grave. And we dug a hole there and we buried the bones and everything. Dave leaned over and said a prayer and we filled the grave up. And that's the end of Emma Crawford and the story.
After reading the story about Emma's tragic life, I'm even more drawn to find out more about her. I'm standing in front of the house where she supposedly lived while she was here in Manitou. Just over that way is Red Mountain, where she made her famous trek. I'd like to head up there and actually go on the path that Emma took, but first I want to go and talk to Dennis Daly in PPLD's Special Collection to learn more about which one is Red Mountain and which one is Iron Mountain. I also want to get more information about Redstone Castle and learn a little bit more about why Emma's family chose to live there instead of maybe here. So I've been doing some research on Emma Crawford, her sister Alice, and her mother. And I was in Manitou, and there are a lot of mountains around us, so I was kind of confused as to which ones were Red Mountain and Iron Mountain.
Okay.
So I was wondering if I could get some help with
Sure. Well, the best place to find information about geographic locations is probably going to be on maps. And here in Special Collections, we have lots and lots of historic maps of Colorado Springs and the Pikes Peak region. So let's take a look and see if we can find Red Mountain on some of these maps.
Okay, great.
This is a U.S. Geological Survey topographic map, and I pulled it because it shows a lot of the topographic features, including a lot of the names of the hills and mountains.
Okay.
This is from 1951. There's Colorado Springs, and we go out here to Manitou. And then we can see just south of Manitou Springs, there's Red Mountain.
Oh, okay.
And just to the east of Red Mountain is Iron Mountain.
Okay.
They're very, very close together and very close to Manitou.
Yeah, did you know there's a story about Emma Crawford, and she was actually buried on the top of Red Mountain.
Okay.
Yeah, she loved Red Mountain, and it was her wish to be buried there when she died. And the story is when they built an incline up Red Mountain, they disturbed her bones, and then a rainstorm came and washed some of the bones actually down the mountain.
Oh.
So I'm kind of curious about that incline too.
Okay, well let's look on the map and see if we can find the incline. Again, here's Red Mountain, and I see this straight line running from Red Mountain down into Manitou. And there's some letters here. It says A-B-A-N-D, which I would take to mean abandoned.
Oh, okay.
So again, this map is from 1951, so that could be an abandoned rail line there. Let's look at a couple of other maps and see if it shows up on some of these others. This is the Pikes Peak Atlas, drawn by Robert Orms, and it shows a lot of trails and things in the area. Here's Manitou Springs, and here again is Red Mountain, just south of Manitou Springs. And this one says Old Incline. And again, this straight line going up to Red Mountain.
Oh, okay.
Now, these both show it as being abandoned, but let's look at a map when the incline was actually in operation and see if we can find it there. This is a map of Colorado Springs and Manitou from 1913 when incline was in operation. Here's Manitou, and here we see Red Mountain. And then again, this one looks more like a rail line. It's got the little cross hatches, and it says
Red Mountain.
Red Mountain Incline Railway.
Oh, neat. Interesting.
And then we have a lot of photographs in our collection as well. And if you'd like, we can see if we might have some photographs of Red Mountain.
Oh, that would be great. I'd love to see those.
So Sandy, we have about 700,000 photographs in our collection here of the Pikes Peak region, Colorado Springs and Colorado. And about 12,000 of those photographs we've digitized, and they're available on our website.
Oh, okay.
Through this digital photo archives. So let's go in here and search for the Red Mountain Incline.
Oh.
There's a couple of photographs. This one is dated 1914. We'll click on it and see a larger version.
Wow, that's really steep.
It is really steep. Down at the bottom it says, the Red Mountain Incline at Manitou Springs with people seated in the cars, showing the roadbed and the tracks. Red Mountain Scenic Incline is written on the first car.
Oh, yeah.
So that's definitely the incline that you're looking for. Let's take a look at that other one.
Great.
This one is taken from above. Looking down, you can see the tracks down here in the car and the city in the background.
Yeah, and Emma, I believe, was buried up on the summit there, so that was probably close to her burial site, too. Yeah.
So this says, view from the top of Red Mountain showing the inclined car below and the town of Manitou at the bottom.
Oh, neat. Okay. Now this is giving me a better idea of the landscape around Red Mountain and Iron Mountain and where it stands in location to like Redstone Castle and the house where Emma Crawford lived. So
if you want to find out more information about Manitou Springs and Emma Crawford and Red Mountain, I would suggest you go talk with Deborah Harrison at the Manitou Springs Heritage Center.
Okay.
She is an expert on the history of Manitou Springs, and I bet she can help you out.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you for all your help.
You bet. Good luck.
Based on Dennis's suggestion, I headed back to Manitou to talk to Deborah. We decided to take a look at some of Emma's haunts, so to speak, starting with Red Mountain.
Thanks for meeting me here. We're at the base of Red Mountain, kind of at the start of the Inman Trail. I know Emma, I had read that she liked to take walks up Red Mountain and that sometimes she did it with a Native American spirit guide.
Yeah, that's what's recorded in her obituary. I'm sure she heard stories about the Native Americans before there was a town in Manitou. They considered the springs here sacred. And the effervescence that came up out of the pools of water was considered the breath of the god. So I'm sure she heard stories like that.
I also heard she had a fiance, a Mr. Hildebrand.
I wouldn't call him a fiance.
No?
In her obituary, he is called a special friend. And in Victorian speak, I don't think that's a fiance. But indeed, they were very close, it implies. And obviously, if he buried her up there, he had a lot of affection for her. He was actually a very renowned engineer. Wilhelm Hildebrand from Germany came to America and almost immediately got a job with John Roebling, who designed and started the Brooklyn Bridge project. And then when he died, his son Washington took over, and Hildebrand was one of the chief engineers. So that was the scientific project of the age. So he was a very well-known engineer, and he was in Manitou starting in 1889 to work on the track system for the Cog Railway.
What happened to Mr. Hildebrand after?
Well, he went on to continuing his illustrious career. He had an office at No. 1 Broadway. He was considered the chief proponent of the suspension bridge in America. He rebuilt the Covington-Cincinnati Bridge that crosses between Ohio and Kentucky. He did several bridges, and then he died in 1908.
So I heard that they built a railroad up Red Mountain and built a pavilion, and that's why they actually moved Emma's body up there?
Yeah, that was the Red Mountain Incline. It was the second one in Manitou. They're actually funiculars. And that one started on Ruxton and was built straight up Red Mountain to the top. It was the second one. 1912 was the first season, and it never did well. It was a little scary, and I don't think anybody was willing to pay money to perhaps plunge to their deaths. So it was never successful, finally closed in 1925 for good. So an interesting chapter in Manitou history.
So it actually displaced Emma's body when they did that.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they tried to use her as kind of an attraction to get people up to the top of the mountain. It didn't work. Wasn't worth it. So
she's no longer up on Red Mountain, though.
No. Eventually, her remains washed out of her grave, and so they moved her to the Manitou Cemetery at Crystal Valley.
Oh, okay.
So
we should go there.
Oh, okay, let's go.
So we were just at Red Mountain, and we saw Emma's first burial place, and so this is where she is resting now?
We think this is her final resting place. We're not exactly sure. I was told by the cemetery caretaker a few years ago that he was told by the cemetery caretaker many years ago that his father, Dave Banks, this Manitou Springs police chief, and Bill Crosby buried her bones here.
Oh.
So we hope she's happy in this location with her tombstone.
Uh-huh. And when was the tombstone put up?
2008. By the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. We do ghost tours every year, and so we have done quite well off of Emma, and we wanted to recompense her in some small way for tarnishing her reputation.
Oh, wow. Sounds like she still wants to be up on Red Mountain.
Yeah, I've heard rumors. I haven't seen her myself, but I've heard rumors, so we'll see.
Now that I feel like I know Emma a little bit better, I'm dying to get back to the investigation of the castle and the ghost of her sister, Alice Crawford Snow. Who was Alice, and why did she and her mother move to Manitou to be closer to Emma's spirit? That seems a bit strange. I'm going to meet with Katie again, hopefully, to find out a bit more about them.
So how was Red Mountain?
It was really fun. I had a good time. I actually got to walk on some of the trails that Emma walked on. So it was really fun, and I did stop by and see her grave.
Cool.
Yeah, but I would like to find out some more information about her sister, Alice Crawford Snow, and her mother, Jeanette.
Okay, sure. Well, let's do a search in Pikes Peak News Finder for Alice Snow. And we only get one result, and the headline is, "Dead Daughter Plays the Piano, Says Madam."
That's kind of creepy.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I actually went ahead and looked this up on microfilm, and I printed it off. I'll read you some of it. Okay. Since the death of Miss Crawford nearly 15 years ago, nightly conversations have been held between the deceased and her mother. And although awe-inspiring and almost uncanny, nevertheless, wonderful demonstrations have been given.
That's really interesting. Doesn't give us a lot of information, though, about Alice and Jeanette. Is there someplace else where we can go to find more information, though, about Jeanette and Alice?
Yeah, we can look at some of our other newspaper databases.
Okay.
The Pikes Peak Library District subscribes to several digitized newspaper databases. Many are fully searchable by keyword and date. These databases are great tools to discover historical and genealogical newspaper articles and obituaries. Note that not all newspapers are available in these databases, but it's a great place to start. So the earliest article I could find on Alice Crawford Snow is from 1884. I'll bring it up. And the headline is, "A Stage-Struck Beauty Cured." And it talks about how she was 17 years old and she ran away from home to New York to try and find acting work.
Oh, wow. It looks like she wasn't very successful at first. It says she tried to secure engagements at several theaters without success. So, and then she went home with her mother, Mrs. Crawford, who was a music teacher.
Alice Gertrude Crawford was born to Nathan and Jeanette Crawford on August 14, 1866 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Like her sister Emma, Alice possessed a talent for music and theater. She showed strong ambitions for fame at a young age, as is described in the article about her disappearance from the New York Times. This was only the beginning of Alice's name appearing in the papers.
The New York Clipper Annual, September 1877. As Rachel Winslow in The Minutemen at People's Theater, Alice Crawford made her New York debut.
The Boston Daily Advertiser, Saturday, August 4th, 1888. Miss Alice G. Crawford of Boston has been engaged by Augustin Daly for 3 years.
The Milwaukee Sentinel, February 23rd, 1896. Mrs. Ella Wheeler Wilcox's romantic poem, Maureen, has been dramatized by Miss Alice G. Crawford at Chelsea, Massachusetts, and a performance of the new work was given at the Academy at that place on the evening of the 11th. The incidental music was supplied by Mrs. Crawford, pianist, and Marian Osgood's Ladies Orchestra.
In 1904, there is an article in the San Francisco Chronicle about Alice's marriage to Theodore Snow of the Yukon Territory.
October 2nd, 1904. A wedding of interest to many in the city and state occurred in Dawson, Yukon Territory a few weeks ago, when Mrs. Alice Crawford Snow, daughter of Madame Jeanette Crawford and a well-known actress of the Augustine Daly Company, became the bride of Theodore Snow, a prominent merchant of Dawson. Mr. Snow first became acquainted with his bride when she was rehearsing in San Jose last spring for the successful presentation of Pygmalion and Galatea. At the marriage, which was quietly celebrated at St. Mary's Parsonage, Father Rebert officiating, Mr. Snow insisted that his fiancée would wear as her bridal gown the classic robe she appeared in as Galatea. Her one attendant was her own little daughter, Maureen Cerrone. Mr. and Mrs. Snow will live in Dawson, only until large business interests there can be disposed of, after which they will make Southern California their home.
It's interesting that she and her daughter had the last name Cerrone at this point, but an article from the Oakland Tribune in 1910 explains that she was married twice. Her first husband, according to this article, was the celebrated operatic singer Cerrone. It's possible that this was the popular vaudeville actor Gilbert Cerrone, whose name appeared in several stage publications during the 1890s. He was also in a Thomas Edison film, Old Maid Posing for Her Picture. A record of Alice's marriage to Cerrone has not been located, nor proof that the mentioned operatic singer Cerrone is the same as the vaudeville actor. Alice Crawford Snow's marriage to Theodore Snow didn't last. In 1905, a postal worker in Dawson reported that Maureen and Alice Snow departed in June of 1905, not even a year after her marriage. An article in the Oakland Tribune from September 9, 1905 describes a musical and dramatic recital being given by Madame Crawford and her daughter Alice at the First Unitarian Church in Oakland, California.
Mrs. Alice Crawford Snow commands the attention of her audience. As in her impersonation of a princess, she tells with master effect of the passions that swayed the royal heart. Grace, knowledge of her art, a strong voice, and a good physical and fine stage presence make Mrs. Alice Crawford Snow a success in her calling.
In 1908, Alice and her mother were listed as living at 137 Ute Avenue in Manitou in the Colorado Springs City Directory. Then, in September 1909, the Gazette-Telegraph promoted the first meeting of the Women's Club of Colorado Springs, which featured a piano solo by Madame Crawford and a reading of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Rime of the Duchess May by Alice. Just 3 months after this performance, the Gazette published a peculiar article about the return of Madame Jeanette Crawford and her daughter Alice to Manitou Springs. The article reports that they took up residence in Redstone Castle. So it looks like after Alice's career as an actress didn't go so well, she moved to Manitou and actually moved in with her mother, Jeanette.
That's right. You remember from that 1909 article, Jeanette and Alice were both living at Redstone Castle, and they were really into the spiritualist movement and into contacting the dead through seances.
Seances, really? Wow.
The Gazette, December 28th, 1909. As regular as the evening shadows fall, the spirit of the dead girl, according to the assertions of her mother, appears at the Redstone Mansion at the foot of Iron Mountain, at the top of which is located the grave. Mrs. Snow, after considerable correspondence with her mother, gave up the stage with the understanding with her mother that the two should once more take up their residence in the Redstone Mansion and enjoy their nightly conversations with the dead. It is the claim of the Madame that piano recitals of the most classic character are given by her dead daughter, who arises from the grave and in a darkened room gives wonderful piano seances. While no one has ever been present at these musical seances, nevertheless, the Madame claims that such a regular feature of the seances had between the living and the dead in the Little Red House at the foot of the Rockies.
This whole story might seem kind of strange, but the Crawfords weren't the only ones practicing spiritualism and seances. In fact, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, came to Colorado Springs in 1923 to talk about spiritualism.
The Spiritualist Church is a national denomination that grew in popularity during the Civil War through the 1920s. The principles of spiritualism include a belief that the soul continues to exist after the death of the physical body and that communication with these spirits is possible through seances given by mediums. Spiritualism became one of the first denominations in the United States to ordain women as ministers and attracted mostly middle to upper class women and some notable figures of the 19th and early 20th century. This included Mary Todd Lincoln as well as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who visited Colorado Springs on May 7, 1923, to deliver his lecture, Proofs of Immortality, which featured photographs of psychic phenomenon. Only 4 years prior, a city council order enforced the ban of clairvoyant and fortune-telling businesses within the corporate limits of Colorado Springs, indicating a backlash against spiritualism perceived to be fraudulent. There is indeed evidence of a strong presence of the spiritualist movement in the Colorado Springs area. Reports of spiritualist meetings being held at Woodman Hall began appearing in 1891 in the Colorado City Iris. While Jeanette Crawford was living in Colorado Springs in 1892, just a year after the death of Emma, the Colorado City Iris reported that Jeanette would speak at the spiritualist service at Durkee Hall on the subject of today.
So we know that Alice Crawford Snow did live in Redstone Castle, but what about those stories about her attempted suicide and disappearance? Is there any way to find out more about that?
Yeah, well, from what I've found, after those articles about the conversations with the deceased Emma Crawford, nothing more was reported on Jeanette and Alice until February 11th, 1910. When it was reported that Maureen, Alice's daughter, was going to be moving to San Jose, California to spend the winter with her grandmother. But a few days later, that headline was soon overshadowed by this one.
Woman is helpless in blazing bed. Shoots self in knee. Rescuer forces entrance into haunted house. Wow. Mystery surrounds injury to Mrs. Margaret Crawford Snow of Manitou. Attempted suicide. Wow, what a headline.
Yeah.
A blazing bed?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So why is she called Margaret in this story?
I'm not really sure why, but as you read the article, you'll find out it's definitely Alice Crawford Snow.
But for the timely visit and presence of mind of John T. White, a Colorado Springs attorney, Mrs. Margaret Crawford Snow, formerly an eminent dramatic reader, would probably have burned to death in bed yesterday afternoon in her home in the much-talked-of haunted house on Red Mountain, Manitou, just after she had accidentally shot herself through the knee with a .32 caliber Ivor Johnson revolver. She will recover, but may be lamed for life if the kneecap is fractured. Despite her denial, it is believed that Mrs. Snow was preparing suicide and was about to point the revolver at a vital spot when the accident occurred. She was divorced from her husband, a wealthy businessman now living in Alaska, a few months ago, and has been in straitened financial circumstances for some time, it is said. She maintains that the shooting was entirely accidental.
The article goes on to explain how the bullet entered her leg near the knee and says that she will be taken to St. Francis Hospital. It also describes how Attorney White had been invited to visit Mrs. Snow in regards to a proposed loan. When he reached the house, the door was locked and the shades were drawn.
Greeted by the smell of smoke, he hurriedly entered through a window and found Mrs. Snow helpless in bed and the bedclothes burning. She told him that she could not move as she had accidentally shot herself.
An article from the February 14, 1910 Rocky Mountain News reads,
What is known as the House of Mystery, a lone mansion on top of Red Mountain near Manitou, took on a tragic aspect today when its mistress, Mrs. Alice Crawford Snow, was found, according to attorney J.T. White, lying in bed, a mass of flames and a bullet hole to her leg. White arrived on the scene just in time to save the woman's life. Mrs. Snow denied that she had attempted suicide, claiming that the shot from the revolver was fired accidentally and that the bed was set on fire by the flash. Although a nervous wreck, Mrs. Snow will recover.
The next day, even more bizarre accounts of the story arose.
The Denver Post, February 15th, 1910. Did Margaret Snow, once regarded as one of the most beautiful women of the stage, now a patient at St. Francis Hospital in Colorado Springs, try to take her own life because driven to despair by poverty and the ever-calling voice of dead sister? Or was she the victim of a quarrel that ended in her being made a cripple for the rest of her life? That is a question which can only be answered by the woman who for 18 months has lived a life of tragic loneliness in the haunted house in Manitou that set against the side of the hill facing Red Mountain, enabled the woman to constantly contemplate its summit where the body of her sister, Emma Crawford, is buried. At 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Snow was placed on the operating table. 3 hours later, she was removed to the charity ward and the attending physician pronounced her condition as most serious. The woman claims that the shooting was accidental, but the story whispered by neighbors who had followed the events of her life is to the effect that she had for a long time been the victim of drugs, of spiritualistic hallucinations, had tired of existence and its disillusionments, and shot herself after she had said farewell to her mother. Which story is true? Only the woman knows. Neither explained the finding of a man's derby hat, evidently brand new, tossed on a serving table in the dining room, or a dent in the door leading to the kitchen as though kicked by some hurrying foot.
The Gazette, February 16, 1910, that Mrs. Alice Crawford Snow of Manitou, who shot herself in the knee last Sunday evening at her home on Red Mountain, fired the shot with suicidal intent, and that she had been planning on the deed for several days is the opinion of a number of her friends who know the circumstances in the case. The fact that she wrote to a friend after she failed to get a theatrical engagement at Denver, telling that soon all would be over, is regarded as evidence of her motive.
Denver Post, February 16, 1910. Owner of hat may explain shooting of Mrs. Alice Snow. If Alice Margaret Snow, the woman who lived in the so-called haunted house at Manitou, who was said to have shot herself last Sunday, had wanted publicity as a means to attracting the attention of theatrical managers to her, she could not have succeeded better than she did when by some means the bullet from a .22 caliber revolver woke the echoes of the house in which she was sole inhabitant. Only later, when going to the operating table at St. Francis Hospital, did she confide the truth to White of what really occurred. Whether the confidence thus bestowed included an explanation of how a man's new hat was found on the serving table in her dining room and accounts for the dent kicked in the kitchen door, only the attorney knows.
The article goes on to describe how Alice sought a loan from Mr. White prior to this fateful day.
To go to Denver, Mrs. Snow had to borrow $10, it is said, and in seeking such a loan, she offered her wedding ring, apparently the last of her collection of jewelry. She went to J.T. White, who loans money, and asked for the loan she needed, pulling off the ring and pushing it toward him. "I refused to take the ring," said Mr. White today when asked about the matter, "but I gave her $5 toward her expenses on the trip. She said she had friends in Denver who would secure her employment. I didn't hear anything more from her, and suppose she had found employment until she called me to her house on last Sunday evening to discuss a loan." As to the note written by Mrs. Snow some days ago indicating that she contemplated self-destruction, it is said that she owed a Colorado Springs business house for a bill of goods. She is said to have written one of the proprietors some days ago in response to an inquiry about payment that this will soon all be over.
Stories along these same lines continue to appear in the Colorado Springs and Denver papers, as well as the Oakland Tribune and the Manitou Springs Journal. The identity of the proprietor to whom Alice owed money was revealed in a February 18th Denver Post article. The article states that the lack of money and an insistent landlord had caused Alice to attempt suicide.
The haunted house in which Mrs. Snow with her daughter lived for 2 years is owned by R.M. Davis of the Photo Supply Company, Denver. She rented it from Davis 2 years ago. 1 year's rent she was able to pay, but she has been in arrears for 9 months. Last week she was informed by W.A. Davis, the owner's brother, who is now in Manitou, that there could be no more delay in settlement of the 9 months' rent due. She begged further indulgence, promising that she hoped to get new pupils for her piano lessons, but her request was firmly denied. That day, Mrs. Snow sent her daughter to California, where her mother is a teacher of music. Then she wrote a note to W.A. Davis addressing it to Manitou. This she intended to be her farewell to life. She told Mr. Davis of her intention to kill herself and asked him as a last kindness to see that her body was taken care of. It is said that she requested that her remains be laid beside those of her sister, which rest at the top of Red Top Mountain.
According to the article, W.A. Davis was one of the first to visit Alice at the hospital, with Alice's suicide letter being delivered to him on Monday, February 14th, the day after the shooting. By February 23rd, the Gazette reported that Jeanette and Alice's daughter Maureen returned to Colorado on account of the accident, and that Jeanette believed her daughter was mentally unbalanced at the time of the shooting due to her strained personal and financial affairs. On April 1st, the Manitou Springs Journal reported that Alice had recovered sufficiently to leave St. Francis Hospital and that she would not suffer any bad effects from the accident. I think I'm going to head back over to Special Collections and talk to Katie again and see if there's any other information about what happened to Alice after the accident.
So we know the suicide attempt is at least reported in the papers. Is there any other evidence out there about her?
Yeah, so here's a news article from the Denver Post from February 15th, 1910. And it says that after an operation, Alice was moved to the charity ward of the St. Francis Hospital. Now, we have here in the archives the patient registration ledger from that time period, but that ledger is closed until 2015 due to HIPAA regulations.
Oh, okay. This is such a sad story.
Yeah.
Did she really disappear?
Well, we can try and find her in some census records and see if there's a death record that'll confirm if she did or not.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll go hit the census records.
Okay.
As it turns out, shortly after her time in the hospital, Alice Crawford Snow appears in the 1910 census with her 12-year-old daughter boarding with Julia Couch at 839 High Street in Colorado Springs. She does seem to disappear from the area after that, but I'm hoping Katie's had some luck finding a death record for her. That'll tell us where she died and when, and hopefully solve the mystery of her disappearance.
So I can't find anything about Alice in any of the census records after 1910. Have you had any better luck finding out anything else about her?
I wasn't able to find anything on Ancestry, but I did go to this website called findagrave.com, and I put in Alice Snow, born 1866, and this is what I came up with.
Wow, and it's got a photo of her grave marker.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad and small.
Yeah, so when I first went to the site, there weren't actually any photos of the grave. But the cool thing about this site is that volunteers go out and they take photos of graves if you request it.
Oh, wow.
And you can even be a volunteer yourself.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool. So do we know how Alice died?
We don't. I was able to go to the California Department of Public Health's website, and you can actually order a death certificate, but it's going to take about 6 weeks to arrive.
Oh, okay. I feel a bit sad for Alice, but I'm glad that we were able to share her story. The fact that she died in California and not here leads me to believe that she's not actually haunting the castle. The mystery's still not over. I still need to find out who took those photographs. During the midst of all this research, Katie has uncovered some new information, so I'm going to head over to Special Collections one last time to see what she knows. The last time we talked about the photographs of Redstone Castle, we were trying to decide if William Davis or his brother Robert Davis, who built the castle, were the actual photographers. I understand you've uncovered some more information since then?
Yeah, I have. I went to the Gazette microfilm and looked up the obituaries for William Davis and his brother Robert. William's obituary really didn't tell us anything, but Robert's did. The headline reads, "Pioneer photographer and curio collector dies at Manitou Springs home."
Oh, okay, so he was a photographer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The other thing that I found, there was one image in the Hermanson collection that looked really familiar to me, so I looked at the digital photo archives and found it there and went to the original print. It's of the Midland Railway Bridge. If you look on the back, see what it says?
Yeah, R.M. Davis, photographer, Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then the other thing that I found, looking through the Hermanson collection, I was starting to notice patterns. There were quite a few images of the Royal Gorge. They look kind of familiar. Again, I went to the digital photo archives and found this image. And you'll notice in the corner here it's numbered 600. Now, the Royal Gorge images in the Hermanson collection are numbered 601 and 613. So they're in that 600 series. So that may be a connection, or it could just be a coincidence.
Oh, okay. Who is this Alex Martin?
I actually did a Google search for Alexander Martin and Robert M. Davis to see if there was a connection between the two. And I found a boudoir photo card that said it was photographed by Alexander Martin, but published by Robert M. Davis.
Oh, so they knew each other. Is it possible that Alexander Martin took the castle pictures then?
It's possible. It's interesting to note that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when studios changed hands, the negatives changed hands as well. Photographers would sell their negatives to other photographers who would then republish the images, sometimes as their own, making no mention of the original photographer. So there's really a question about the original creator for a lot of these images.
Wow, that sounds kind of sneaky.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find out more about Mr. Hermanson who had the photographs?
I did. I spoke with Mr. Hermanson's widow. She told me that she had a grandfather named James R. Miller. If you recall, in the Hermanson collection, there are quite a few negatives marked R. Miller.
Uh-huh.
That was him.
Oh.
He was a photographer briefly for about a year in 1905. He had come to the region for tuberculosis, was cured, went on to do other things, but became a collector of glass plate negatives.
Oh.
So his collection was passed on to his son, who then passed it on to his daughter, Mrs. Hermanson, and her husband, James O. Hermanson.
Oh, okay. So we may never know who took those creepy photographs of the Redstone Castle.
Well, I think we can really tie them back to the Davis brothers. But you're right, they do kind of remain a mystery.
Even though the origins of these photographs is still a bit unclear, I have managed to solve a lot of the mysteries surrounding them. By looking into the history of the house, I discovered the Davis brothers who built it. I learned about Emma Crawford and her burial atop Red Mountain, and Alice Crawford Snow, whose life on stage and dramatic downfall have managed to keep her spirit alive. Whether Red Mountain or Redstone Castle are actually haunted by the Crawfords, I don't know. But the images and the stories leave a haunting impression, don't you think? Isn't it amazing, the tales that a house can tell?
There was a lot of spiritualists around here then, and they used to hold big meetings in Durkee Hall. That's part of the old Burns Theater. And it got rumored around that Emma's spirit appeared on the top of a red mountain on moonlight nights. And you know, they beat quite a trail up there, people did, those that believed in her.
Do you remember a haunted house? I remember this as a child. I never got near the house.
Over where?
It was over south of Manitou Avenue.
In Brixton?
And it was quite a tall house with great big high windows. Do you know what the story was on that?
When we buried Emma Crawford on Red Mountain, 20 years afterwards, her sister came to Manitou. And that was Alice. She was quite an actress. And she had a daughter about 13 years old, went to school in Manitou, and she lived in that house for 2 years. Now her mother and Emma, all of them were spiritualists, see?
Oh.
So she rigged up some contraption there, I don't know, you could hear it beating and batting around down the hill there for a mile. And they'd get together there and jump the table up and down, and I think that that's where it got the name of Ghost House.